Climate tune. Hold on, drum tune.
Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst in the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, and newly added Bricks Behind the Ivy with Jeff Rogowskis. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts. CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. A spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's January 7th. Somehow we're in 2025, and baseball news has slowed to a crawl. Here we are, stuck in the middle of another offseason. What's next? Let's find out. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome to episode 98. No Cub has ever worn number 98, so this week I got to go with the obvious. We're going to go 1998 and Sammy Sosa. Now that Sammy's back in the fold, we'll celebrate 1998, and this will be the Sammy Sosa episode of this podcast. So I'm sitting here thinking about episode 98. I'm getting very close to 100. Obviously, that should happen not long after the first of the year, but here we are. This is after the first of the year. So next few weeks, I should have episode 100 out, which is a big number to think about. I've kind of never thought I'd get here, but here we are about 2.5 years after starting this podcast, and it's been such a fun ride. But thinking of big numbers, that goes right into Sammy Sosa. So I'm going to, it's been a couple weeks now. I took a break over the holidays. I was all set to do another episode or two before the break, but a number of us in our household got sick. We had one of those super bugs kind of going through everybody. And then we wound up with an emergency surgery in the family. Everybody's doing well, so that's all fine. But there was a lot going on. Then you factor in the holidays, you factor in a little bit of travel. I was able to make a trip back home to my hometown to go see some family and saw some old friends, which was really, really good. And just took some time off. It's always good to relax, kind of recover a little bit. We all get in the grind. We all have a lot going on all the time. And this was kind of something, there was no big news. A lot of the big news actually happened while I was sick, so I really couldn't talk about it anyway. So yeah, this will be kind of a recap. I'm not going to go too far into it. If you're following Cubs podcasts and you're following what's going on, you've already heard about the Matt Mervis trade for Vidal Brujan. You've heard about the Caleb Tealbar signing. We'll talk about those a little bit in terms of how those play into roster construction. You've also heard a lot of opinions on Sammy Sosa, and as another old white dude, let's be one more voice in the sea. Now, Sammy's kind of a mixed thing for me, and I'll get into my thoughts on him as to why, and you guys can tell me if you agree with me or not. So Sammy Sosa was a lot of fun to watch. I was thrilled when the Cubs traded for him back in, I think it was 93, 94. Traded George Bell to the White Sox for Sammy Sosa. There were some other players in the deal as well, but that was the core of the deal. And Sammy was a young, exciting player. He had a lot of energy, played a good outfield, big arm. You could see some power potential in there. Nothing like what we didn't think we would ever see 60 home runs there. But I remember in 1996, I wound up going. I was visiting a friend in college and kind of following the Cubs and whatever. And Sammy got hurt. Actually, it was 97, summer of 97. And he had shown some homer potential. Don't have his stats in front of me. I probably should. But hey, this is a podcast and I can edit out sound. So let's get those up in front of me. So it was 96 I was thinking about. So summer 96, I'm out of town visiting a friend. We're talking about the Cubs. And, Sammy's having a good season. That year he hit 40 home runs. He got injured, missed the last month plus of the season. If I remember right, I think he got hit by a pitch in the hand. Broke a finger. But in 1996, he only played 124 games. He hit 40 home runs, drove in 100 RBIs. Was actually 15th in the MVP race. So you could see the power was there and it was developing. 1997, he did play 162 games. He was healthy all year. Did not make quite the splash he had made the year before. Only hit 36 home runs. what we wouldn't give for a 36 for a player to hit 36 home runs on this current Cubs team. But different eras and all. And drove in 119 runs. So you could see the power potential was there, and he was exciting to watch. He was fun. He was energetic, and there are a lot of things people have said about Sammy Sosa over the years, and I'll get into some of them here. One thing I think is undeniable is he was energetic for the fans. He was energetic for the camera, and he always put a positive face forward. I know he came from a very poor background. He was not one of those kind of entitled athletes. I feel like he always wanted to win. He always wanted to push. He always wanted to drive, which honestly probably fed right into the whole steroids thing. But then in 1998, things took off. He was off to a decent start that year, but that was the year Mark McGwire, everybody was wondering if that was going to be the year that Mark McGwire was going to stay healthy and give the Roger Maris record a run. Obviously, he did. But all of a sudden in June, Sammy took off. He had like 20 home runs in the month of June. And that took him from, he's having a good season, hitting some home runs, to, oh my God, he might actually be in this thing. And it was electric. We were just a couple years after the work stoppage, the strike, which turned a lot of fans off. The Cubs were suddenly young and energetic. In 1998, you had Kerry Wood striking out 20 Astros in April. There was a lot to be excited about on the north side for the first time, probably since, I guess, 92. They were kind of decent. Looking back, actually, I was off on the trade. The Cubs traded for him in 92. That was his first year where he played some with the Cubs. I didn't think it was that long before. I was thinking it was more 93, 94, but that's where it stands. And that was kind of one of the few good Larry Himes moves. I talked about him a few episodes ago, and I don't really want to talk about him ever again, probably. But so Sammy came in, super exciting. Unfortunately, that's also the year, Harry Carey had passed that previous February before that season started. Man, Harry Carey would have loved 1998 with Kerry Wood coming on, Sammy Sosa hitting all those bombs. I mean, it would have been electric. But so he comes on and he's doing his thing, hitting those home runs. And I'm not sure. I could make a pretty good argument. And there have been documentaries done. ESPN 30 for 30 did a great one on the home run chase. It was probably a little McGwire centric. But I feel like I could make a pretty good case that if Sammy Sosa doesn't have the bubbly energy, the big burst in June, and kind of everything he brought to that stage, it's entirely possible neither Sosa nor McGwire actually break that record that year. You could just tell for Mark McGwire it was an absolute grind. The only times he ever seemed to have fun with it were those times after when Sammy was really challenging him, and they would have, the Cubs Cardinals would get together head to head. They were giving each other hugs, and it was just, it created a different vibe for a guy in McGwire who had always been so tightly wound inside of himself, it seemed, and was not a guy who really ever gave much out to the fans from what I want. Now, he never played on my team. You couldn't help but kind of follow those Oakland A's teams. Speaking of those A's teams, rest in peace to Ricky Henderson. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. No real Cub connection, but man, what a great player that dude was. And Mark McGwire just always seemed so within himself, kind of closed off from everybody else, and it was never a guy that really gave off any kind of a fun vibe. Obviously, he had massive power, and you can see this as a rookie. He had 49 home runs, tied with Andre Dawson for the major league lead that year. So those numbers were always inside of him, but it was a matter of getting them out. And I think Sammy kind of drew that out, and Sammy, for all his flaws, and we can talk about the steroid era. My argument on the steroid era is it was what it was. There were, obviously, baseball was looking away as much as possible there for several years. There was the inevitable year where they convinced the players union to agree to anonymous drug testing that turned out to not be anonymous, which probably we all should have seen coming. And that really it was never really handled well. The very first time I heard about some of this stuff was when Mark McGwire had the androstenedione in his locker. It's sort of right there on a shelf for everybody to see. Thought nothing of it. In fact, right off the top, he talked openly about it. And this was also, it was kind of the perfect storm for baseball. It was also unlike football, which had the steroids scandals years before, back in the late 70s, early 80s. this was really the first era in baseball where players actively strength trained. I mean, we heard Ryan Sandberg at his Hall of Fame induction speech talk about, baseball players didn't lift. They didn't want to get too bulky. And obviously the exercise science on that has changed dramatically over the years. But that was the prevailing mindset up until the kind of the late 80s, kind of those Bash Brothers A's teams kind of got things going. Now that also got the steroids cooking, but you started seeing a lot more really big dudes playing in the 90s. Bo Jackson famously crossover playing both NFL and NBA, or NFL and NBA, NFL and MLB until he hurt that hip, and then he played baseball for as long as he could. But it was a different world. And so we can all think what we want to think about the steroids. I am a put them all in the Hall of Fame and just tell the story of the era guy. I mean, you still have an era of baseball, and many of the best players from that era are not in the Hall of Fame. But, the Hall of Fame is going to do what the Hall of Fame is going to do. Major League Baseball is going to do what Major League Baseball is going to do. I think I've had so many issues over the years with sanctimonious baseball writers picking arbitrary criteria, their arbitrary winners and losers based on who they liked. I mean, I think Big Papi, David Ortiz, is a good example of a guy who should be a Hall of Famer. He absolutely deserved to be a Hall of Famer. He also was tied up in the roid scandal, just like a lot of these other guys. But writers liked him better, and maybe he gave a better mea culpa at some point, and so he's in. So we cannot say we're keeping steroids out of the Baseball Hall of Fame, because we're not. Guarantee you there are other guys in the Hall of Fame that use that were not maybe high on the suspicion lists, whatever. If Barry Bonds had retired the day before the first season where he hit big home runs, and retired the day before he took his first injection, he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer without question. He was the best player in baseball for a decade before he ever got into the steroid use. So from my standpoint, my beef with Sammy was really never the steroids. It was a little disappointing when all the stuff was coming out and he was in such denial while it seemed so blatantly obvious that he had used, and didn't love the fact that, getting in front of Congress, suddenly he, didn't speak English, needed translators from a guy who I'd heard speak a lot over the years. I get it's a legal situation. Maybe you want to be extra careful, but it just came off as an act. But there was also a bit of Sammy that could get a little tiresome. He was outwardly, he was great. He played to the crowd. He would run out there. I will never forget, first game after 9/11, him running out with the American flag. He would give you those moments. He had that vibe. He had it all the time. And he hit some big postseason home runs. 1998, he had a couple big ones in 2003 in those playoffs. But there was always kind of that little vibe, or that kind of that tension you could feel that was part of the locker room. And I've talked a lot about not liking the way the 2004 season ended. That's the most bitter season of my Cub fandom. The team ended at war with the broadcast booth. Dusty Baker threw gas on the fire. I don't think Sammy was the biggest driver, but Sammy didn't diffuse any of that at all. And famously, after the season's over, the Cubs get eliminated after game 161. So for the first time in 2 seasons, the Cubs had a baseball game that did not have any bearing on playoffs. They played some actually, I don't think they played any meaningless games in 2003. I think they actually clinched on the last day of the season. So pretty much every game for 2 seasons had major playoff implications for the first time in my lifetime. The Cubs have been good in 1984, 1989, couple teaser seasons in between. They had the wild card season in 1998, but the Cubs hadn't strung together multiple seasons ever in my active memory. So we want to get into that, and for him to leave, just see you guys, I'm out. After that last game, famously Kerry Wood smashed the boombox. And I think, he also back in 2003 had the brief suspension for the cork bat, and I don't know. Sammy was not a simple character. He brought a lot of good things. There's an entire generation of fans today that are fans because of Sammy Sosa. The way I'm a fan because of Ryan Sandberg, because people of my era are fans because of Sandberg, Rick Sutcliffe, Mark Grace, Andre Dawson. There's a generation of fans right now that became Cub fans, fell in love with Wrigley Field, fell in love with the vibes because of what Sammy Sosa brought to the table. And I think that's important to recognize when we're factoring all this stuff in terms of how we look at this, complex character that was Sammy Sosa. And so for a couple years after 2004, I had my own bitterness. I was kind of like, I'm glad he's gone. Let's just kind of forget about that era for a bit. But that lasted, he didn't do anything to me personally. I took a lot of great joy from watching him play. I mean, I was living in Philadelphia during his peak years. And I would go every time the Cubs were in town. I would try to get to at least one game of every series when they would come to town. Sometimes I would go to 2 or 3 if it worked with. I was in grad school and I had a job and was married. If it worked, I would go to more than one game. And you would go early because you would want to go early and see the Cubs take batting practice. And it was absolutely electric. I mean, they just lit balls everywhere. I'm never going to say I was not a Sammy Sosa fan, but there were a few years after that where I was a little butthurt over the whole thing and, didn't have proper perspective on, but that's what time's for. Time heals. Time doesn't necessarily heal everything, but time heals a lot of things. And I think this deal with Sammy Sosa, I think it lasted a lot longer than it needed to. I think at the time, it made sense probably that there were 4 to 5 years, maybe up until the point where the Ricketts bought the team, where people that didn't like Sammy from within the organization were still there. So maybe there wasn't necessarily a great window to make amends and bring him back. I've always found it a little bit odd that Tom Ricketts would be the one keeping Sammy away. And maybe he was the face of it. He certainly took it. But what I really think is that I think it was former players keeping Sammy away way more than it was Tom. I mean, Tom could be making money by bringing Sammy Sosa back. So if Tom Ricketts often is this like stem cell for evil that a lot of Cub fans want to point to. He's a cheap bastard who never spends. He just wants to rake the fans over the coals for money. Does not care about winning. Like all those things get applied to him. There are elements of truth in all of them, but I don't think any of them are explicitly true. I talk about spending all the time. The Cubs spend enough money to win. The Cubs have gone over the CBT multiple times since Tom has owned the team. They had a run from 2016 to 2020 where the Cubs had the 4th, 9th, 5th, 2nd, and 3rd highest payrolls in baseball. And while it was probably an accident, they went over the CBT last year. So the Cubs spend enough to win, so I'm not going to go the cheap argument, whatever. But the point is, people look at Tom Ricketts and put all these negatives on top of him. Whatever's wrong, it's Tom's fault. In this case, I think Tom was providing cover for a bunch of former players, probably my childhood hero, Ryan Sandberg, being chief among them. Given things he said over the years, given his Hall of Fame speech, I mean, he clearly did not have high regard for people who used performance-enhancing drugs during that era. Factor in, Kerry Wood has continued to have a big place within the organization. We know how they parted. I don't know personally whether Kerry and Sammy have ever talked again, what their relationship was like individually. But knowing the news about it, like it would not surprise me at all if a lot of those former players, and again, nobody really ever goes too on the record. We're not going to push them hard, but like really know what Ernie Banks' thoughts really were. Fergie Jenkins, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, what did those guys think about the performance enhancing drug era? I could definitely see a bunch of them being kind of against celebrating Sammy and bringing him back. But, and that was 1998 was 26 baseball seasons ago. And 2025 is going to be 27. The Ricketts have owned the team since 2010, 2011. So time has passed. And I think too much time has passed. It was time to bring him home. I'm glad they're doing it. I'm going to Cubs convention here in a couple weeks, so Sammy's going to be there. So hopefully I'll get to see him, shake his hand, maybe get an autograph. But it's time. It's time to bring him back. You cannot tell the same point I make about the Baseball Hall of Fame and the steroid users. You can't tell the story of Major League Baseball from 1990 to 2005 without talking about performance-enhancing drugs. It was everywhere. So many of the best players during that era were implicated in some way, shape, or form. A lot of big records were broken that tie kind of directly to that power, whether it's either to make them stronger or, as Sammy said, and I've heard this is this is legitimately one of the primary uses of steroids and performance enhancing drugs like them, is when you're in a game that's physically a grind, it helps you recover faster. So that can be a bunch of things. It can help you come back from injury faster. So maybe you're playing more games than you would have otherwise. You can also recover from workouts faster. So you're able to, instead of hitting it hard and then maybe having to rest a particular muscle group for a longer period of time, you can probably hit it harder and get more gains from being able to hit it more often. And you look at that era where Sammy was probably pretty clearly taking, I would say, I don't know, it's hard to say for sure whether he was taken in 96. 97 results aren't there, but, I don't know if we're coming back from injury. But from 97, he played 162 games. 98, he played 159. 99, he was 162, 156, 160. It really wasn't until 2002 he only played 150 games, and then after that, he fell by 10 to 15 games every single season. That's a big deal. And he, during that time, 98, 99, he hit 66, then 63 home runs. Fell to 50 in 2000, but then hit 64 in 2001 and 49 in 2002. So he's the only player in Major League Baseball history to hit 60 home runs 3 times. And he had a run of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 seasons where he hit 40 or more home runs in 6 of the 8 seasons. And one of the other seasons, he only missed it by 4. And the other season, he missed it, and he had 40 home runs or more in 7 of the 8 seasons. And the one he missed, he only missed it by 4. He had 36 in 1997. Sammy's a complicated legacy. Now that he's in, he'll be around more often. We'll probably talk about him more on this show. I wasn't actively avoiding the Sammy Sosa topic. In fact, I'm sure I've talked about him before. But it was never a key point. So those are my feelings on Sammy Sosa. I'm glad he's back. Looking forward to seeing him at Cubs convention and seeing him around Wrigley Field. My guess is I don't know that they'll turn around immediately and put him in the Cubs Hall of Fame this season. But why not? I mean, if he's back in the good graces, I'm not even going to talk about the non-apology apologies. But clearly there was a minimum bar that was laid out for him to meet, and the second he met that bar, Tom Ricketts came out and said, "Thank you, Sammy, for that letter. We'd love to see you at Cubs convention." Like, there was clearly something on the table that Sammy had to do, and whether there was kind of an ongoing negotiation and there were things Sammy was going to say or not going to say and they negotiated, or whether he finally decided to go meet that bar, who knows? I'm just glad it happened, because those two sides just kind of having that pissing match doesn't do anything for anybody. And so now people who don't like Sammy can actively talk about why they don't like Sammy. And the people who love Sammy can have a chance to see him back at Wrigley Field, autograph sessions, throwing out the first pitch, singing the 7th inning stretch. It's going to be good to kind of close the book on that, fully close and bring that chapter of Cubs history kind of back into play. And so I'm good with it. I'm happy about it. And I'm glad he's back. So that's the Sammy piece, which is good because the Cubs have not done a lot lately. So as referenced earlier, the Cubs did make the trade. They traded Matt Mervis to Florida for Florida. I still call them the Florida Marlins. 2003, it's still too soon. The Miami Marlins traded Matt Mervis to the Miami Marlins for Vidal Brujan, former top prospect, infielder, could potentially play third base, could be a utility bat off the bench, can play all over the field. He's got some talent, hasn't done a ton. The prospect status never really translated. It's kind of a change of venue switch for both of them. The interesting thing, I think it's a good deal for Matt Mervis. I think it's going to give him a chance to go face major league pitching. I'm sure he's going to get plugged in at first base or DH and get every opportunity to play with the Marlins, because why wouldn't they? And they're not a good team. They don't spend a lot of money and they have holes to fill. He'll get his chances. For Brujan, though, it goes into a little bit more of a complex situation. When you look at the Cubs roster, 26-man active roster is what they're targeting for opening day. They're going to have 5 starting pitchers, possibly 6. We'll see what they do. I think they'll probably have a 5-man starting rotation, but the guys will come in and out of it throughout the year. 8-man bullpen, typical standard. You're only allowed to have 13 pitchers. I'm sure the Cubs will carry the max because, again, like every team in baseball does, why wouldn't they? You're going to have 2 catchers, probably Miguel Amaya and Carson Kelly. Let's just assume no other trades. Michael Busch is starting at first base. Nico Horner starting at second. Dansby Swanson starting at short. It's really looking more and more like Matt Shaw is going to get every opportunity to win that third base job. So let's sort of pencil him in there at this point, which, in looking at the overall roster, I've got a spreadsheet I kind of maintain and update over time. Matt Shaw is not on the 40-man. So for him to make the opening day roster, somebody else is going to have to go, which is going to kind of feed into the discussion we're going to have here in a second. In the outfield, you're looking at Ian Happ, Pico Armstrong, Kyle Tucker. Seiya Suzuki will probably DH most of the time, be a 4th outfielder. Pretty good chance that Alexander Canario is going to be the Cubs' 4th outfielder, 5th outfielder, however you want to count it, with Seiya likely DHing most of the time. We'll see how that goes. Could be Kevin Alcantara. He's on the 40-man. Owen Casey's on the 40-man. The thing with Canario, and I'm going to hedge this one for the first time in a while, I don't think Alexander Canario has any options left. So the way Major League Baseball works is when you come up for the first time, you have 3 option years, which means those are 3 seasons in which you can be optioned to the minor leagues. And within each of those seasons, you can go up and down up to 5 times. If you get sent down a 6th time, then you have to go clear waivers in order to clear waivers and get sent back down, or another team claims you. That doesn't happen very often. I mean, teams keep count of that. If they're going to demote a guy for a 6th time in the season, they're probably ready for him to go clear waivers anyway. So he was first added to the Giants 40-man roster in November 2020 after the 2020 season. So that started his clock. So 2021 was going to be the first year where he would either stick in the major leagues or get sent to the minors and be optioned to the minor leagues. So he was optioned by the Giants in 2021. He was optioned by the Cubs in 2022. He was optioned by the Cubs in 2023. So every player gets 3 option years. He was awarded a 4th last year because there's another rule that tags onto that where if you used up all 3 of your options and you haven't hit 5 years of being on a Major League 40-man roster, then you can be awarded a 4th option year. So he had a 4th option year last year, which was used. And so I think he's done with options, but I will say on SpotTrack's website, they do show him having 1 option year. I've asked a couple people on some sources I trust on Twitter questions to try to clarify, but I believe he's out of options. Roster Resource on Fangraphs does not show him as having any options. That's in line with what I believe happened. Another example of that is Caleb Killian from the same Chris Bryant trade. Caleb Killian didn't get added to the Cubs. He was never added to the Giants 40-man roster. He was added to the Cubs 40-man roster when they called him up in June of 2022. And then he's gone up and down since. So he was optioned in 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that's his 3 option years, used them up last year. So I've been saying on this podcast that he does not have any option years remaining. That's not true because of that rule. He has used all 3 of his option years, but has fewer than 5 years on a 40-man roster. So he's awarded a 4th option year this year. So he does have 1 option year left, which actually helps the Cubs because it makes it a little bit easier to keep Caleb Killian. He's a guy that you can either use as starter depth. He can start the season in Iowa as a starter, stay stretched out, come up in the event of injuries, or they could use him in creative ways out of the bullpen. But I have been heading into this offseason looking at Caleb Killian as a guy that either had to be on the 26-man active roster, or he needs to get traded, or he's going to get DFA'd and released or traded through that process. So the good thing there is, Killian is around as an option. But back to the position player situation. So when you look at the 26-man roster, we've been through the starting lineup. The bench is probably looking like Alexander Canario. And then you get some choices. There are 2 more bench spots. If you assume that the position player roster is 2 catchers, Busch, Horner, Swanson, Shaw, Happ, PCA, Tucker, Seiya as the DH, Canario as the 4th outfielder, then you're left with 2 more bench spots. Right now I have Miles Mastrobuoni and Gage Workman penciled in there, but I don't think that's reality. I think the reality is between Miles Mastrobuoni, Gage Workman, and Vidal Brujan, I think maybe one of those guys makes the team. Now, Mastrobuoni has options remaining. Vidal Brujan does not. Miles Mastrobuoni, maybe you pencil him in Iowa as organizational depth, kind of that third shortstop, kind of that hedge in case Gage Workman doesn't stick. I was surprised when they took Workman. The fact that they did take him when I didn't think the Cubs were going to take a position player in the Rule 5 draft tells me they like him. Now, if he comes out and looks terrible during spring training, then all bets are off. Cubs send him back to Detroit and whatever. But I do think there's probably a 60-40 or better chance that Gage Workman makes the Cubs opening day roster. I think there's something about his game and his profile that they really like. Working through that then leaves presumably one bench spot. And I don't think it's going to be, if Gage Workman is there, I don't think Vidal Brujan's going to make the team. Miles Mastrobuoni can go to Iowa. That's fine. He stays on the 40. Doesn't really cost anything. You need a 40-man spot anyway to bring Matt Shaw up. So maybe Vidal Brujan doesn't make it, but they're bringing him into spring training. So if Vidal Brujan can come in and show that he is the player prospect people thought he was 2-3 years ago, then maybe he changes some minds. But that last bench spot's going to be interesting. You know, the candidates right now on the 40-man for that spot are Luis Vasquez. He's got 2 options remaining. I assume he'll either get traded somewhere or be in Iowa to start the season. Kevin Alcantara, Ben Cowles, who the Cubs really like. He's got all 3 option years left. Vidal Brujan. I'm already penciling Canario into one spot. And then you've got Gage Workman and Miles Mastrobuoni. So I think, that's kind of what you're looking at. But the Cubs are also looking at potentially more bench moves. Right now, there is not, unless I know Canario played a little bit of first base when he was rehabbing his big leg injury a couple seasons ago. Before he was cleared to play outfield, he was playing some first base. So unless he's somebody who can fill in and be the backup first baseman, Cubs really don't have one right now. So do the Cubs bring in, I think they're also going to want to have Matt Shaw insurance at third base. I think they're confident in what Matt Shaw can do, but we heard Jed say they're not just going to hand him a job in December. Like, he's going to have to go win it in spring training. Rookies are going to struggle. Matt Shaw, even if I saw the other day, he's got the second highest odds per a poll of executives by MLB Pipeline. Dylan Cruz for the Washington Nationals is the favorite for the NL Rookie of the Year. He got 50% of the executive vote. But then Matt Shaw was second at like 18.5%. So I see him projected up there as a potential candidate for Rookie of the Year. So if he's going to be that guy, he's still going to have some struggles. We saw Michael Busch last year had a nice season overall, and came out hot to start the season. Major League Pitching figured him out, and he was really kind of rough for a month. Then he countered, and then Major League Baseball countered, and he countered back. So he's shown he can make those adjustments. I'm happy to see last season Matt Shaw did not start the season, on the tear that he had finished on the previous year. So he's shown in the minors he can make some adjustments. Because he's going to have to do that at the Major League level. He's going to come up. I don't know if it's that high leg kick and they're going to have to play with that. But he'll come up. I think he'll have success. I mean, he's torn up with USA Baseball. He's done really well. And every level he's played, he's torn up the complex league, A-ball. He was AA MVP. The guy has checked all the boxes. But he has not faced the season of Major League Pitching yet. That's going to change some things. It always does. That comes for everybody. So they're going to want to have somebody on the bench. And, of course, there's injury, too. So they're going to want to have somebody on the bench to be able to cover third base. So I had talked about, both on my podcast and as a guest on Bricks Behind the Ivy with Jeff Rogowskis, talked about potentially, Yohan Moncada as a guy who could make a lot of sense for this team. He's a real upside play. He's shown in the major leagues that he's really talented and can have some big success. He's had a million injury problems the last few years. Obviously, anything the last couple seasons on the south side of Chicago, that team was just not a winning team. There was not a good energy around that team, not good vibes. So it's hard to really judge focus and daily effort and what you're giving into it. But, Moncada now has a lot to prove. He's a guy who was he was the number one prospect in baseball when the White Sox traded for him. And to get back to that, to be able to get a good free agent deal, to be able to stick in this league for 8 to 10 years, which I assume is his goal, he's going to have to come out, grind, perform, find a spot. So he's a guy that can make a lot of sense as Matt Shaw insurance. The question then, if the bench is Alexander Canario, Yon Moncada, Gage Workman, Carson Kelly, who there is going to play first base? Now maybe Miguel Amaya can play some first base. So I don't know. That's one thing to watch as they build this out, because the other option is to go another direction and go more of a kind of a traditional corner infielder, go somebody who can play some third base and some first base and let that go. Or, maybe you don't carry both a Moncada and a Gage Workman. Maybe that's a reason why maybe they don't carry Canario. We'll see. There are choices to be made coming up. Same thing in the starting rotation. As it looks right now, you've got whatever order you want to put them in: Justin Steele, Shota Imanaga, Jameson Taillon at the top of the rotation very clearly. Then you'd probably pencil in Matthew Boyd and Javier Assad. And then right behind them, you've got Jordan Wicks and potentially Caleb Killian and Cade Horton, who's not on the 40-man yet, Ben Brown. A bunch of those guys who could go either direction. One thing to watch with Brown and Horton, and I want to talk about this a little bit before I wrap this show up. You look across a Major League Baseball season, 162 games, you've got roughly 1,450 innings to fill, 1,450. Technically, 162 times 9 is 1,548, but you have games that are shortened by rain. You've got some extra inning games. You get games you lose on the road where the home team doesn't bat in the ninth, so you don't have to pitch a ninth inning. So it's variable, but you have to expect to need to fill 1,450 innings. And so when you look at that, you got to factor in starting pitchers, bullpen, workloads to see kind of what that looks like. So last year, just breaking it down, Imanaga led the Cubs with 173 innings. Jameson Taillon was next at 165. Steele, because he had that hamstring injury, largely only threw 134. He was up over 150 the year before. Kyle Hendricks was 130, and Javier Assad was 147. So he was up in that 150 point. Now, Javier Assad is an interesting guy. He's shown he can be successful in every role. He's been successful as a starter. He's been successful as a short leverage guy. He's been successful in multi-inning relief stints. But what he's shown as a starter is pitch inefficiency. He talked about all the time last year. So many times he was at 80 pitches by the fourth, which meant a lot of his starts, he's only going, 4 to 6 innings. He did have some starts where he was more efficient and was able to get through 6 or 7. But that's not he made 29 starts and threw 147 innings. If he makes 30 starts times 5 innings each, that's 150 innings. So he was really averaging just a tick over 5, like 5 1/3, almost 5 2/3 innings per start. And ideally, he'd be better than that. So if I look at the 2025 projections from Zips that are out, there'll be more projection models out that we can start to analyze and play with in the coming weeks. But for right now, that's the main one that's out. They project Imanaga, Steele, Taillon, each for 29 starts, which makes sense. Those are the 3 guys you expect to be anchors of your bullpen. Everybody misses a start here and there, whether it's stretching guys out because of rest. Maybe you wind up with a double header where you bring a kid up from AAA to start a game and then get somebody some extra rest. The reality is somebody may start 30 times. Nobody did last year. It was Imanaga with 30, or Imanaga with 29, Assad with 29, J-Mo made 28, Steele made 24, Hendricks made 24. You factor that in. So they project Imanaga for 29 starts, 180 innings. Steele at 29 starts, 170 innings. Taillon, 29 starts, 168 innings. And then Assad, 26 starts, 161 innings. So that gets through 4 starters. And they have Matt Boyd at 24 starts, 132 innings. The Cubs have a lot of guys that are going to be on some workload restrictions at various points because of what they did last year. Matt Boyd did not throw a lot of innings last year. He came back late in the season, made a handful of starts, pitched in the playoffs, coming off Tommy John surgery. You'd expect him to be in a position to go. He's a more veteran guy, so it's not like he's a 22-year-old kid coming off Tommy John where you're going to be extraordinarily careful. The Cubs will still be careful with him, but I would not expect him to go out there and make necessarily 30 starts through 170 innings. I think if they could get 24, 25-ish starts out of him, that's probably a good thing. Other guys will get hurt. They project Ben Brown with 5 starts. They project Jordan Wicks with 15 starts for 102 innings, Caleb Killian with 3. And when you look at Cade Horton, Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks, like none of those guys threw 60 innings last year. So they're younger guys and you project that workload. I think last year the goal for all 3 of those guys across whatever levels they would have pitched in would have been to get to, assuming they all would have stayed starters, and Ben Brown we are already seeing kind of a hybrid role, some starting, some bullpen work given where they were. But we would have seen, had they all started, probably a target of 120 to 140 innings of work those years. I mean, I think Cade Horton right now is 100, 105, 110 innings as a pro because they took it easy the first year he was drafted. Last year, obviously, he only threw like 35 innings. So actually, I think he threw 55. He only threw 53 in college. Actually, he threw 53 in college. He threw almost 90 as a first year in the organization. So he's up to like 130, 140 innings total as a pro. So the idea that he's going to go out there, again, make 28, 29, 30 starts and throw 150 to 180 innings, like that's just not realistic. Would love it if he could do it, but I think the target for him would be 100, 120, same with Ben Brown. And what's interesting about those guys is we see it all the time. We see, guys come up as starters at some point in AAA. Maybe they're not efficient enough with their pitches. Maybe they have 1 or 2 really strong pitches. And the major league team says, well, let's just get them up and get those 2 nasty pitches in our bullpen and use that. We've seen guys like Jordan Hicks. This year, it's going to be Clay Holmes. It's going to try to go from, the back end of the Yankees bullpen back to being a starting pitcher with the Mets. So we see a lot of those, and guys go back and forth. So this might be a really interesting year, and plenty of guys too. I mean, John Lester did it. Many guys have done it. Make kind of your early start in baseball, be in the bullpen. Come up and, I could see Ben Brown and Cade Horton by mid-season or in the second half being in this bullpen, either as 2-3 inning long guys to piggyback with another starter. Maybe you're trying to contain Matt Boyd's, innings count and you start him and he goes 3 to 5, depending on whatever you can get. Come in, stack in Ben Brown or Cade Horton, try to get another 3 and get the game to a closer, or throw 4 and finish it out. I could see a lot of breaking up workloads like that. So I could see a lot of Ben Brown, Cade Horton in this bullpen as the season goes on. And they're going to have a lot of choices. And similarly with the bullpen, just like we talked about with the roster, let's go back to that list here. What's interesting is Fangraphs does project Porter Hodge to have 32 saves, which is encouraging. They like his stuff. But when you look at so what I said, I have Steele, Imanaga, Tyone, Boyd, and Assad penciled in the 5 starting rotation spots. To make up the rest of the active roster, I've got Tyson Miller, who has no options left. Keegan Thompson has no options left. Nate Pearson has no options left. And Julian Merriweather has no options left. So I have those 4 penciled into the 8-man bullpen. Add in Porter Hodge, that's 5. Add in Eli Morgan, who they just signed, and that's 6. And then I've got Caleb Tealbar. Interestingly enough, they announced the deal like almost a week ago, and I've not seen the money yet. I can't imagine it's going to be high. He made $3.8 million with the Twins last year and was expecting a pay cut this year. So I don't know, 2.5, 3. And Ben Brown in there. But also, some guys that are interesting and have options are, Jack Neely, Luke Little. We'll see about Ethan Roberts. The Cubs really seem to like him. He really seemed to struggle last year. We'll see if he's able to make it through spring training. Unfortunately, he's just been a different pitcher than he was before the Tommy John that he had in 2022. Gavin Hollowell is another one. Rob Zastrinsky is on the 40-man. I'm thinking at this point it's looking more and more like maybe Rob Z won't make the opening day roster. But they do have some other guys with options, so maybe somebody else with an option actually starts down just to, if he has a good spring, see what he has, and you can just He's going to make league minimum. You can cut him at any point. So a lot of interesting things to watch for. Still rumors about trades. Just remember, we kind of get stuck in this zone when the Cubs don't do anything or there's no news. People kind of fill in their own stuff. And a lot of the stuff you see on social media, Cubs Twitter, Cubs Blue Sky, there's a lot of kind of base negative. Oh, the Cubs are done. This is all they've done. I still believe after the Cubs traded Cody Bellinger and cleared that money, I still believe they're going to spend it. So the question is on what? I still think the Cubs are going to sign one or two more relievers. I think some of those guys I just named, possibly Gavin Hollowell, Rob Sestrisny, some of those guys are not going to make the 40-man roster at the end of spring training. Some of them will get cut as soon as the Cubs make some of those signings. I still think there's every possibility there's a trade out there. I don't know if talks to Seattle for Luis Castillo are completely dead. I know we're all kind of waiting on Roki Sasaki. Obviously that's somebody that we would all love to get. I would say I think the Cubs odds are a little bit better than what kind of general baseball Twitter is giving them. I see all sides with the Dodgers. Obviously, that's the place that has the vibe, the spend. They're defending world champions. They've had a lot of Japanese players. They have a couple guys now that Roki Sasaki has played with. But also, at some point, the Dodgers are at a point now where they have signed so many players, added so many guys, deferred so much money, that the ability for them to provide playing time, and now Roki Sasaki would be fine there. He's not a guy who's probably going to go out and make 30 starts this year anyway. And the Dodgers have a million injury-prone pitchers, so they would be able to factor that in and work it out. But Roki Sasaki has talked about development as kind of the number one thing for him. And Dodgers do develop a lot of pitchers, but they also develop a lot of pitcher injuries. So I don't know about that. And also at some point, there's a limit to how many guys the Dodgers can take. I mean, I joke about it on social media sometimes, but unless the Dodgers are going to get an exception to carry 60 guys on their 40-man or carry a 35-man active roster while everybody else is stuck at 26 and 40, every player they add now, they have to cut somebody pretty good. I mean, they just put a catcher, I'm blanking on his name, first name starts with a D and last name starts with a C, and it's a blank on it. But he was a former top prospect catcher that probably is going to be very interesting to somebody. My guess is once they DFA'd him, there's 7 days to make a trade or clear him through waivers. My guess is he's going to wind up traded somewhere because I think he's too interesting of a prospect to just clear waivers and have somebody just grab as a minor league free agent. Maybe the Cubs are that team, but every move they make now, somebody probably fairly interesting is going to have to get let go. So I do wonder at some point, I know everybody wants to be a Dodger, but at some point everybody can't be a Dodger. So we'll see. San Diego makes a lot of sense for Roki Sasaki, another West Coast team. Yu Darvish is on that team. They've had a pretty good record with Asian players. But also now they've got the mess where Peter Seidler's widow is suing his brothers for control over the team. So I don't know what that does in terms of making San Diego look interesting or what that's going to do to their budget over the next 12 to 18 months. So I don't know. Seattle makes some sense. Would you go there? Yeah, that's a pretty good destination for Asian and Japanese players. Famously, that Ichiro dude kind of worked out. He was solid. But I think after those three teams, or even with those three teams, I think the Cubs certainly hold their own in the Japanese market. I think the Cubs have a very good reputation. Yu Darvish still talks to players about what a good experience he had in Chicago. I think also that when the Cubs had to trade him, I think they did him a solid. And I think they had kind of said, hey, we're going to, I believe they went to him and said, we're going to clear your salary. What are some places where you'd like to go? And we'll see what we can make happen. And I think San Diego was high on his list and the Cubs were able to make that work. There's clearly no lingering bad blood between Yu Darvish and the Cubs. And that's a good reputation to have. And it's helped. I mean, Yu Darvish said good things about Chicago for Seiya Suzuki. The Cubs have that reputation. The Cubs are a legitimate landing spot for Roki Sasaki. Will he pick them? I don't know. It's entirely his choice. I mean, the money situation is not going to matter. It's all out of international bonus pool money. Nobody's going to be able to give more than a couple $1 million difference in signing bonus. And again, Roki has said that his long-term thinking is development. Where can he develop the best? Because he knows this isn't about this contract. He's coming over like Shohei Ohtani did. It's not about this contract. It's about develop me, use me well. In 6 years, I'm a free agent. Then I get my big payday wherever it is. And, honestly, if the Cubs get him, get 6 really good years out of him, I'm sure I'll be pissy if the Cubs don't sign him at the end and extend and give that big contract. But whatever, get him now, develop him. I think the Cubs have a lot going for them in pitching development. I think getting Tyler Zombro, I think, is going to make a big difference. I think he's a really good get for them this offseason from Tread Athletics. But here we are. We're just waiting. And people don't do well with waiting. We're waiting. We're going to figure it out. Roki Sasaki cannot sign. Well, he can sign anytime he wants, but he's not going to sign before those international free agent budgets reset, which is January 15th. It's been said he'll probably sign very quickly after, or at least announce a decision, which is, frankly, honestly, the important part. So at that point, there's not a lot of starting pitching necessarily left on the free agent market. You're looking at maybe, I think Jeff Hoffman is one of those relievers that wants to turn back into a starting pitcher. He's interesting. Flaherty is out there. Jack Flaherty's a guy who's had some really big seasons in St. Louis, kind of fell off a little bit, rejuvenated in Detroit, obviously had a good run with LA in the postseason. He's a guy that's going to make some money. And he'd be interesting. He'd be another one of those Cub Cardinal guys I would have to kind of get over my baseline dislike for the guy. But hey, if I can wind up liking John Lackey, I can wind up liking anybody. So more to come, more to see. Lots of possibilities for trades. Again, a lot of trades come out of nowhere. And no point last season did I have Michael Busch on a radar for a trade. There are trades that get talked about. Obviously, the Kyle Tucker rumor came up fast and moved quickly. But it's not something that I remember, Cubs fans talking about, at the end of the season, beginning of the postseason. Like, that was not a long-standing thing. So maybe there's already been too much chatter about Luis Castillo to the Cubs. Maybe that's not going to happen. But trades can happen. They can happen quickly, and they can happen out of nowhere. And we'll see. I do believe the Cubs are going to spend that money. I think they'll be right up around the CBT again. Probably the CBT this year is $241 million. I would look for them to be probably around 230, somewhere between 225 and 235, because they're going to want to leave themselves $10 million, possibly as little as $8 million to add players during the season, trade deadline, incremental adds if guys have injuries, things like that. I think after more or less accidentally going over, we do know they went over now. They went over by about $2 million, $2.5, $3 million last year. So again, not catastrophic for the Cubs. It's a little bit of tax for Tom Ricketts. It means that this year but going forward, unless the Cubs clear that third threshold by $20 million, like the Mets and Dodgers have done, and the Yankees did in 2023, unless you're doing that, all the penalties are financial. It's all just tax to the owner. So it all just comes down to Tom Ricketts' choice to pay. It used to be if you went over 3 consecutive years, your draft picks fell 10 spots. Now that's tied only to going over the third tier by $20 million. So, there's not a lot here for fans to worry about. I tend to use the CBT as not as a cap, but as a guide to what the Cubs are going to do, because they have shown most of the time under Jed Hoyer, that's kind of where they're going to be. That's going to be their starting point. Now, under Theo, they went, as I said, they went over multiple times once they hit that winning window. And maybe that's the next thing that has to happen. They've got to get to that first winning season, make a bit of a playoff run, and then they'll add the money back. The Cubs did that in spades, especially 2018 to 2020. Not always wisely, though, which is kind of why the budgets got pulled back and all that. The Cubs weren't developing pitching, spent a lot of money on Tyler Chatwood and Brandon Morrow, and while Yu Darvish was a good sign and was ultimately has lived up to his contract, that first year plus was rough. He was injured. He was coming off the tipping his pitches thing, which is really just the Astros cheating. So I don't know. We'll see. I do think they'll spend the money, but we'll see. Maybe they will. We'll find out. We'll know by the start of spring training they did or they didn't. And I see too many people, I think, being mad about it now. I see a lot of sarcastic posts. Oh, wow, they were going to respend that money, and what are they doing? Well, the offseason's not over yet. As I say all the time, there's plenty of time to be mad later. We're going to have the entire once pitchers and catchers report, they haven't spent that money. We've got all kinds of time to be mad before the season starts. And after that, we have all kinds of time to be mad depending on how they play and whatever. But I have a hard time getting worked up over it right now. I think there are still a lot of moves on the table. A lot of questions with this roster. I do think this team is better as they stand right now than they were when they ended the season last year, which I think bodes well. I think that bullpen was way better ending last season than it was at any point the year before, outside of maybe the top 4 guys. But we'll see. They still have more work to do. I do expect them to do more, and I will be anywhere between disappointed and angry if they do not. But again, that's for a later point. But I have some cool guests coming up. We're coming up on episode 100. I'm hopefully going to do something cool with that. I'm not sure what yet. Enjoy everything that's in the Bleacher Bunch family. We're making some additions and making some changes. Still have the Son Ranto show, Cup of Cubby Blue with Sarah Sanchez, Baseball Rabbit Hole with Michael Cotton. We've added Jeff Rogowskis and Bricks Behind the Ivy, and we're going to be changing up some of the offerings. So follow Bleacher Bunch on all social media channels, TikTok, Instagram. I'm not sure about Instagram, but Twitter and TikTok for sure. Those are the big ones. Blue Sky, at Bleacher Bunch Cubs, I think, are one of them. But yeah, follow us. There's a lot of content. You're going to have stuff in your feed, maybe not every day, but probably a lot of days. It's going to be a good kind of trying to be the fan home for Cubdom. So check us out and let us know what you're thinking. And in the meantime, hopefully the Cubs keep making moves, and hopefully I'll see some of you guys at Cubs Convention here in a week or so. Go Cubs! Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!